understand that peacemaking in Somalia has got a particular character, and that working with those communities who can reconcile and build peace together might be at least part of the answer, not just putting all the effort into the central government. Now, if we think about the international community, and what I was doing at Chatham House really was partly to try to be a bridge, I think, between people who had international concerns and Somali people who are living through these very hard times themselves. The international concerns are not always identical to the concerns of the real people. There are concerns about Jabab and radicalization and possible recruitment, not just in Somalia, but even among Somali communities abroad. And Western countries have also been very worried about the threat to shipping coming from piracy. And some calculations about the cost of the piracy problem and shipping has been that it might be costing as much as $5 to $8 billion, the cost of countering piracy. The Western countries have been footing the bill for AMISOM, which is an expensive undertaking. I think that the sums at the moment are in the region of about $800 million. And then there was a similar amount has been spent on humanitarian assistance. So there are a whole number of interventions by the West which are costly, but they haven't yet delivered anything like the kind of peace and stability or even the safety of the high seas that I think people would like to see. Now, I wanted to look backwards a little bit and to ask how it is that Somalia has got into this situation of breakdown and why it's lasted so long. I take the view that there were weaknesses in the original design of the Somali state. The Somali state that was founded in 1960 had got some particular features that made it, gave it some weaknesses. One of those was and the other thing I'd highlight is that it was a country made up of two parts with two different colonial traditions. So there was a combination of the Italian legacy and the British legacy in one new country. And I think that this was more complicated than a colonial inheritance where a single system was passed to the successor country. And I think it's made the legal framework and the administrative framework weaker than it might have been elsewhere. Later on, we have to consider too the nature of the government, particularly after the 1969 coup. From that time onwards, there was a very clear manipulation of clan by the central government. There was the loss of democracy and the loss of public accountability, started right back in 69, so that's already 40 years. There were very weak institutions under a revolutionary government, and the legal framework was weak as well for the same reason. And there was very little in the way of protection of citizens' rights. So it is what we could call the bad neighbourhood. Wars with neighbours squandered human and material resources in Somalia, armed movements, and they were clan-based movements. So that by the time the era of the Siad Barre state came to an end, the country was already deeply fragmented along these lines with armed groups, clan groups, weak institutions, and very poor framework of protection for the citizens of the country. And that's in a way that problem still remains for Somalis to solve today. And the transitional federal government fundamentally saw itself as being accountable to international donors, to an international community or the UN, rather than being accountable to the people in the country. We also saw in 2006-07 that Ethiopia's military intervention, although they're a very powerful country, it also didn't bring peace. So we're moving now, I think, on the side of the international community, is moving towards new approaches, which recognise that, or I hope they are anyway, I should say, recognising that Somalis themselves need to reconcile and to create the government institutions that are accountable to them and not accountable to outside factors or outside players, and that the decentralised authorities that have appeared in different parts of Somalia already may be a more productive route to stability than just focusing on the establishment of a government in the capital. The London conference is going to take place on 23rd of February, and I hope that the British government's going to be able to use that occasion to re-energise international efforts to get Somalia out of the rut that it's been in now for a very long time. But it's very important the way that it needs to come right